Some of you who are new to my channel may not realise that I actually do agree with Andrea 1000% on her interpretation of the read technique of interrogation. Some of you have brought it up in the comments and we've discussed it at length, including what I think is wrong about the technique and how our model of the peace technique, which focuses on information gathering rather than eliciting confessions, is much more reliable. It's based on open-ended questioning, building rapport, and allowing suspects to give their own accounts without interruption. It's seen as less coercive and more reliable, and minimises the risk of false confessions. It also improves the quality of the information obtained. Given its ethical acceptability under international standards, it is considered to be the most ethical treatment of suspects in police custody. Anyway, well, let's have a listen to what Andrea says about the read technique, because she is 1000% on point.
We're going to have to pause here to have a few things to say about the read technique. Because the read technique is yet another unsubstantiated, unfounded, unverified procedure that, according to law enforcement, is the premier way of extracting a confession from an unwilling suspect. This has been the foremost technique that's been used, that law enforcement officers were trained in for decades. And it has rapidly fallen out of favor. Trying to remember timeline-wise when this first started to become an issue. Because this technique has raised enormous concerns about the potential, if not even the likelihood, of producing false confessions. Those of you who follow a lot of crime stories and things like that online and on social media, you might remember a recent story about a young man who confessed to killing his father, only his father wasn't dead. That's the read technique. That's the type of thing the read technique does. Jojo mentioned last night, and I'm so grateful that she did. It's such an important reminder. The most common factors in wrongful conviction cases, in exonerations, the things that they most commonly involve: false eyewitness identification, junk science, false confessions. False confessions feature in about 30% of these exoneration cases. Thank you, read technique. So this technique is predicated on the idea that people who are guilty of a crime feel shame about it. And therefore, they will want to relieve that shame. There's no validation for this at all. As somebody who's represented quite a lot of guilty people, not a proposition I personally would agree with. It varies, you know. Some people feel shame, but an awful lot of them don't. And especially the ones that are particularly egregious, the ones that do the kind of things that you have a hard time imagining how a human being could do that to another human being. It's lack of shame. It is a guilt presumptive model, meaning it's a technique that you use when you already think this guy is guilty and you treat him as though he is already guilty. There's very specific stages and techniques that are used. The one that gets the most attention is the one about lying. Lying to the suspect, threatening the suspect, getting the suspect to think that it'd be better if they confess. They'll feel better. It's the morally right thing to do. Psychological and moral pressure. But very specifically, part of the technique is to lie. To lie to the person that you're interrogating about the case that you have. To try to scare them. Other developed countries, they prohibit this flatly prohibit this. The United Kingdom has prohibited police from lying to suspects since the 1980s. Not so in the Reid technique. So this has been recognized for a number of years. It has come under fire for a number of years. It remains admissible in most courts, but legislatures are starting to respond. There's good indications that people who are particularly susceptible to producing false confessions as a result of the Reid technique are juveniles and those with mental illness, those with cognitive deficiencies. So there have been states that have adopted legislation that now prohibits police from being able to lie to juveniles, to kids, lie to kids to get them to confess. They're no longer allowed to do that in some states. But this is still a minority, but it is a growing trend. Reid technique has been abandoned by a large number of law enforcement agencies and by organizations that train law enforcement agencies because they know by now you get on the stand and you testify about your Reid technique and the interrogation you performed using those techniques. And there is going to be a defense expert there telling the jury about what a deeply unreliable process this is. So law enforcement has begun to back away from this, and that's been a process that's been ongoing for about a decade. So this is not new. This is not novel. This is not something, oh, we just figured out in the last few weeks. We have known this for a long time, what a problem this technique is.